Found a lot of gaps in that first question, which to me is kind of depressing in a lot of ways, but I did learn a lot, which was inspiring for how I can shift my practice, starting this fall. And then in terms of questions, I still have a lot of questions left about what is constructive responsive teaching, and we will have an opportunity at the end to record questions. Tony said we still have some flex time left in our week 5 schedule, so if this whole subject of culture responsive teaching is something we do want to spend more structured time with, we can make that happen. So we'll worry about questions at the very end. Quick agenda. Summarize up these objectives. You're going to get a very fast and furious intro to what is culturally responsive teaching. There's a lot of theories, there's a lot of researchers, we don't dig too deep into that. A lot of you, for your graduate coursework that you'll take in the fall, you'll likely take an entire semester that is focused on CRT. For me, it was incredibly beneficial. That was at LU. We want to start framing some questions. We're not expecting you to become these amazing CRT teachers in the next 2 weeks. Where we really want to see us start to bloom is to take what you already know and to bring all of your awesome leadership traits that you're bringing to the table and put them to use once we get into the fall to become truly transformational teachers. So, a lot of objectives, right? It's really easier to say what the session isn't. This session is not a toolbox or a toolkit that will give you practical bits of knowledge or methods to become a more culturally responsive teacher. However, the 2 follow-up sessions that you chose to go to following the session are specifically to this point. You can ideally walk away today after the 2 follow-up sessions with some practical ways to build culture in a part of your curriculum. This is not me telling you how to be a more culturally responsive teacher. As I already said, I have identified some serious weaknesses in my own practice in not doing this effectively. So treat this as me learning alongside with you all. And then lastly, what we want to avoid is the mindset that what I really am next fall is going to be a science teacher, and I'm going to do some constructive, some culturally responsive things on the side. That defeats the whole purpose of what CRT is. And you're going to see this and metaphor probably over the next few years, but it's not I'm an algebra teacher and these are my CRT skills. It's we appreciate the culture of the students first and foremost, and the curriculum is what's going to allow them to kind of blow up, to blossom like that spark. So that's what this session is about. So with that, I know some of you do have some awesome experience and background with culturally responsive teaching. I ask that you please step up and let your voice be heard for this session. We could definitely benefit from hearing others' opinions. If I say something that doesn't come across right, or that could be in fact not accurate, please call me out on it. A lot of this is super new to me, and I'm doing the best I can. With that, assume best intentions. Especially if we're going to watch a video of a core member, which is a non-example. So just assume that he does have the best intentions in mind, which he did. Before we play our first video, this is one of many, many, many quotes that defines what is CRT. That's the acronym for Culturally Responsive Teaching. So go ahead and take a look. This is not the definition. This is just one that we like after all of the ones we looked through the past week. Alright, and then somebody who can really explain today's session much more eloquent than me is a former core member named Vic Diaz. He is the man within the entire structure of Teach for America who truly knows what CRT is all about. I'm going to play about a 4-minute video where he's going to really coherently articulate everything I'm going to say in this session. So I'm hoping that by having him do it first, it will make more sense when I try and clarify and brush up on the topics later. So Vic Diaz is going to give a 4-minute little spiel on what is CRT and what does it mean for us as teachers.
I'm a Director of Design on TPSD and Teach for America. And I'd like to take just a few moments to give you a primer on culturally responsive teaching and critical pedagogy. A few things I want to talk about are what these things are, as well as to distinguish them from some other things that are sort of floating around in our organization right now that sometimes get confused for culturally responsive teaching and critical pedagogy. So the first thing I want to point out is that culturally responsive teaching and critical pedagogy are not the same thing, but you're going to see us sometimes use them interchangeably. And that just kind of reflects where we are in this work right now. And I hope that over time, and hopefully with your help and your contributions, we're going to be able to better tease out the difference between responsive teaching and critical pedagogy. But what culturally responsive teaching and critical pedagogy do have in common is that they are a perspective on education as much as they are a tool. They're a lot more than just a set of best practices or top strategies or what works in schools. It's a way of thinking about education. It's a way of thinking about education's connection to society. And it's a way of thinking about teaching, learning, and schooling that is a little bit different, and in some cases a lot of it different, from some of the other perspectives that we see within our organization, also within education more broadly. Second thing I want to tell you about culturally responsive teaching and critical pedagogy that they have in common is that we're really looking for three outcomes when it comes to our work with students. We want our students to be academically successful and achieve academically, but we also want them to exhibit more developed cultural competence as well as just a sharper critical consciousness. And these three outcomes come from the work of Gloria Ladson-Billings, who says basically that culturally responsive teaching should push towards those three aims in students. It's not enough for students just to do well on a test or for students to just be deemed intelligent. What we're looking for are students who are intellectual. And being intellectual means knowing a lot about myself, knowing a lot about my culture, knowing a lot about other people and other cultures, and being able to work with those people in a respectful and affirming manner, and also having a critical understanding of the world around me. And so that's what we're looking for in terms of outcomes with culturally responsive teaching. And you'll see us going back to these three things: academic achievement, cultural competence, and critical consciousness, time and time again as we think more about culturally responsive teaching and critical pedagogy. The third thing that these things have in common is they're both intended to help students better navigate attention that many students of color and students from poor and working class backgrounds face in school, where they seem to have one identity at home and in their neighborhood and another identity at school. That is that there's one way of acting and being and behaving in school, and there's a different one at home. And students feel a tension where the more I sort of become, or I own that academic identity, the less of my cultural identity I retain, or vice versa. And so what both culturally responsive teaching and critical pedagogy try to do is to bridge these two things for kids, so that they're developing both academic and cultural identities. And their academic identity affirms their cultural identity in the same way that their cultural identity pushes their academic identity. So this navigation of identity, again, is going to be something you see quite a bit of. And the last thing I want to say in terms of what these things have in common is that both of them are what Ladson-Billings calls a pedagogy of opposition. And what it opposes is the assimilation forces and the assimilative practices that we tend to see in schools, where kids, as they go through education, are assimilated more and more into a mainstream or dominant group that may or may not reflect, and probably doesn't reflect, who they are culturally, where they come from in their backgrounds. These assimilative processes seek to make invisible home cultures and sometimes just all and out eradicate home cultures or just render them inferior. And we're opposing that process with culturally responsive teaching critical pedagogy. So this notion of opposing assimilation is again something that I think you're going to see these two things have a lot in common with, or a lot of common.
So a lot of what we'll go through for the rest of the session, I can make it just kind of hit, but I will be going to it in more detail. One of the things we also want to address before I hit you with the superintendent's Venn diagram is what this might look like academically. What CRT is not is just completely like tossing aside the curriculum that y'all have created or that you will be implementing in the fall. We still have to keep that curriculum in place to set them up on pathways of future opportunity. However, what it is bringing into their culture into our curriculum to further promote their future pathway. Culturally, what is not, we hear this a lot in Teach for America, it's not heroes and holidays. It's not simply changing students' names and math word problems or hanging up a poster of Martin Luther King Jr. in our classroom. It's actually identifying where the difficulties are, how we can connect students from their own cultures, and then helping them navigate in the culture that we created in our classroom. And then socio-politically, we don't ignore parts of the hidden curriculum because they don't exist. Like, I think right away to history when never learned about Japanese internment, wasn't a part of the standards, never even knew about it. It's up to us to still bring these things to our students' attention and teach them the education that they deserve. Here's the Venn diagram I was specifically speaking of. Okay, this is called the multiple worlds model. Yes, it's intense. And it's kind of hard to wrap around at first, but the easiest way that I saw it is these transitions is what's important. Think of what your students' culture is like at home with their families. Think about what their culture consists of with their peers. Is that what is represented inside of our classrooms? Right? Why do we sometimes see acting out? Why do we sometimes see students not want to raise their hand? Not use please and thank yous? It's typically because the transitions that exist are not very easy for students to make. So for me personally, my transitions in high school between home, which would be family and peers and school, were very easy. I came from a life of privilege. It was a white suburb of Chicago. We had a really good public school. I treated my teachers the same way I treated my parents. It was just a very natural transition for me to be myself in my high school, just as it was to be myself out of high school. That may not be the same for a lot of you, but really what we really care about now is our students. This will likely not be easy transitions for our students' culture to be kind of honored or replicated within the culture that we create for them. So what our job is with culturally responsive teaching is to try and negate some of these transitions or facilitate them so that, again, students are more able to feel like themselves while still getting that education. It's that balance between what's important to us and what's important to our students. To bring this to life a little better, each CMA group has a really kind of brief scenario that is something that has actually happened to each of the ILs, like in our own experience. And it's going to be by CMA group. I already gave Kelsey and Jessica their mini case study. Is there somebody from the CMA group here? Here. And my ELA rock stars. Awesome. So here's your task. Within your CMA group, just have somebody read the quick case study to the rest of the crew. I want you to analyze where does tension exist within this diagram in reference to your case study. So don't go just for the obvious of like, yeah, I know this is messed up, this is how we could fix it. Look really to see that where are the transition difficulties occurring between maybe family, peers, and then the classroom itself. Take about 5 minutes or so within your CMA groups, and then we'll just have one person present the case study to the rest of the school team when we're done.